sadly, for many, many Christians, Christianity means a system of belief. And there's this strange, unspoken assumption that if we could just get all of our doctrines right, get every blank filled in with the right word, everything would be great. Then we'd live as good people. Well, that's been tried an awful lot. People listen to an awful lot of hours of religious broadcasting, and they read a lot of pages of books, and they fill in an awful lot of blanks, and they're still mean or lazy or prejudiced or unkind or ungrateful. And so I think what a lot of us are realizing who are involved in ministry in many different ways is that if we want to see really long-term transformation in people, that calls for a different approach to education. And what's fascinating is it brings us back to the example of Jesus. I just think of one place in the Gospels, I believe it's in John 7, Jesus says, if anyone is willing to do God's will, he'll know whether my teaching is of God. And so Jesus is saying that the way to know is by a willingness to do. And I think that's what so much of this new approach is paying attention to. I really do feel a change in the wind. The things that might have been most convincing for traditional Christian audiences now have the very opposite effect. Just as an example, I think in a lot of churches and in a lot of Christian communities, if you don't yell and shout and sweat and spit a little bit, you don't really show that you mean what you're saying. But I think for some of these younger audiences, they want to know that you have passion, that you feel and believe what you're talking about. But if you have to push too hard, it might suggest either that you're insecure, that your message isn't that good, or that you kind of want to dominate by force. In a funny way, I gain credibility in the emerging culture when I admit that I'm not certain. And when I'm honest about my own questions, and when I'm honest about my own problems. And I think it has huge implications on all of our communication, preaching, other kinds of speaking and teaching, and writing as well. Prayer for the rest of us, I think, wants to appeal to two different kinds of people. In the ABA market, the kind of people who go into Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or Borders, they go in and want to buy a book by Deepak Chopra or the Dalai Lama or any number of other writers who write about spirituality in a kind of a generic sense. These people feel alienated from the church, they feel alienated from what they would call organized religion, but they're very interested in spirituality. So as a Christian author, I would love to be able to write a book that would appeal to them and be able to introduce them to a Christian approach to prayer. But then I think for Christians, thousands and thousands, millions of churchgoers, they've heard a lot of sermons on prayer. They may have even read a few books on prayer. But very often those approaches to prayer are all oriented around guilt. You don't pray enough. You don't pray long enough. You don't pray with the right formula. What I'd like to do in the book is do two things that I think people think are contradictory. One is I'd like to be very simple, but the other is I'd like to go very deep. So for example, on the simple side, we'd like to build the book around 10 words. For example, the word thanks. Well, it's one simple word. We'll use that to talk about gratefulness. We'll talk about prayers of gratitude. Just a simple idea of thanks then can take us very, very deep in our lives of learning to associate pleasure with God and let that result in gratefulness toward God. But sometimes we're in pain and we feel a lot of depression and anxiety and all the rest. Well, then there's a kind of prayer that we can lodge in the one simple word, why? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? And in the scriptures, there's a deep tradition of prayer asking why. They're called prayers of lament. So we want to help people learn how to have prayers of lament where they bring up all their pain and their questions to God. So they don't feel guilty about that. They realize, yeah, this is what people do in a relationship with God. So that's both simple, but also to go very deep. The second book we're talking about, where people really feel pain in their day-to-day lives, it seems to me, are around these four struggles. Hurry, we just feel our lives are too rushed. We don't have time to enjoy and savor and rest. And worry. We're all struggling with control. We wish we could be in control of everything. We're sort of given the promise that we can be in control of everything, which is not true. Fear. Our imagination rushes to 1,000 ways that every small problem can become a catastrophe. And then the whole issue of anger, the resentments we have, the flaring up of anger that we have. And these four things are so destructive to our soul. And we have many people who go to church and sing worship songs and lead Sunday school classes, but one or more of these four sort of heart-wrenching problems are very real under the surface. And so we'll associate with hurry, worry, fear, and anger disciplines, spiritual disciplines that help us take a problem and use it as an opportunity for growth. There is just an awful lot of formulaic stuff that has kind of superficiality. It attracts people's attention, but doesn't really satisfy them. So I think to be able to deliver some books that go deeper than some of these formulaic approaches, that really surprise people. You know, I feel this sometimes. I open a book, I read 2 paragraphs, and I think, I know exactly what the author's going to say. And the only reason I read the book is to find out if I was right or not. But I love the idea of writing a book that every time a person turns a page, they think, wow, I never thought of that before. Oh, that's fresh. It seems to me this is what Jesus did. When Jesus taught, the people thought, boy, I've never heard anything like this before. And so that's what I hope I can help do in some small way. I think we're going through a transition that is no less dramatic and profound as a transition that gave birth to the Protestant Reformation. The medieval world that had formed at the decay of the Roman Empire, that medieval world that lasted for 1,000 years and withstood incredible difficulties and had produced heroic Christians, was just crumbling. The whole worldview was crumbling, the social structures were crumbling, and the reformers represent these brave, bold people, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, and others, these bold, courageous people who said, we believe the gospel can survive in this new context. And I think what's going to have to happen is that writers and pastors and Christian leaders, we have to help equip one another to help the next Reformation occur. And we have to deal with this new wave of change that's washed up on the shore. Tremendously exciting, tremendously challenging, and an awful lot's at stake.